Okay, for us to really understand exactly how to make use of the Places API, I added an article preceding this lecture, so we can go ahead and click on the article to access the documentation. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up Google Chrome so that we can actually look into the documentation together. So we are going to be using the Place API over a web request, and because of this, we kind of need to have a place autocomplete request URL. So this is what the request URL is going to look like. Now we need to kind of gain some understanding about the different segments of this URL. Firstly, let's talk about the attributes. So the attributes in the URL is actually talking about in what format we want the result from this API to come in. So most of the time, we'll always want our response to be in JSON format. Well, alternatively, we can also have the result in XML as well. But as you can see, JSON is always recommended. Now, we're going to talk about the different parameters that we need to add to our place request. And some of them are required and some are optional. So the required parameters consist of the input and the key. So the input is referring to the text string on which we want to perform our search. It's more like our search query. And the key is actually referring to our API key, which is actually our map key. We already have that inside our project. Now, the optional parameters are also very important. We need to pay very close attention to them. So a session token is a random string which identify an autocomplete session for billing purposes. What this means is that for every search query that we want to perform, so we need to generate a token for it. So this is necessary so that Google wouldn't overcharge us for using the Places API. So for us to really understand the importance of this token, let's consider a real world scenario. Let's say we want to search for Times Square. When we press TIME and a space SQURE, so that's considered to be one query, right? So for us to perform all of this query, we need to use one particular token. So as we are typing in these different string or these different characters, we are actually performing a request, but we are going to be using just one token because we have only one interest in the search. Then let's say for instance, after we've been able to have the predictions for Times Square and we select the one that we have in mind, and then again we come back and want to search for another place in Palo Alto. That is considered to be a fresh section and we need to generate another token for that particular request. So that's why the session token is very important. So another optional parameter we need to keep in mind is the component. So the component is very important. Let's say for instance you want to limit your search to a particular country. All we need to do is to go ahead and add the component, the country, and then the country shortcode. So this will go ahead and limit our search query within a particular country. So let's say for instance, if we want to limit our search query to only places within the United States of America, we need to go ahead and append this component to our URL. So now that I've had a very good understanding of play autocomplete requests and how to put together the URL, it just makes so much sense that we'll see the response that we're going to have at the end of the day. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down a little bit and I'm going to copy this URL. So all we need to do is to replace our API key here and we are good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and I'm going to create a new tab in my Google Chrome and paste this here. Now the next thing we need to do will be to replace the API key with our own. So I'm going to go to Android Studio and copy my API key. So guys, go ahead and copy yours. Please don't use mine. Okay, so this is where we saved our API key. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and I'm going to return to Google Chrome and I'm going to go ahead and paste my key here. So let's go ahead and test this and bam, so we have our response. So I actually have a Google Chrome extension that actually beautifies my JSON. So it's called JSON Viewer. So in case you want it, you can go ahead and install it. So from our response, you can see we have 5 different predictions. So if I drop this down and drop this down, you can see the description, You can see the place ID, the match string. So there is just so much information about every single place. So now that we've been able to see all of this, the next thing we need to do will be to go ahead and integrate this into our application. So I'm going to return to Android Studio. So I'm going to go to the search page. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new method. I'm going to call this method search place. So this method is going to take in a parameter. So the parameter is going to be the place name. So definitely this method is going to be asynchronous. So I'm going to have the async signal. So what I'm going to do will be to go ahead and define the URL. So in the article preceded this lesson, I added the URL there. So we need to go ahead and copy it and paste it here. Okay, so now we have our URL. Now the next thing we need to do will be to go ahead and add the place name inside of the URL, replace our key, the session token, and maybe our country code. So let's go ahead and do that. So we are going to start with the place name. So I'm going to go ahead and append the place name here. So I'm going to have the $sign and then the place name. Alright, now the next thing we need to add will be our API key, which is the map key. Alright, so we're going to leave the session token for now. We'll come back to it later on. Now you can go ahead and make use of your own country's shortcode, except you don't want to add the country component, but I think it makes a lot of sense most of the time. So now that our URL is ready, we can now go ahead and perform the GET request. So we can simply say via response, this will be equal to await request helper dot get request. And we're going to pass in our URL. Right. Now the next thing we need to do is to confirm that this request is successful. So if this response returns failed, we'll automatically know that the request was not successful. We can just go ahead and exit this method. So, but if it's not, we can now go ahead and take a look at our response. So for now, I'm going to display the response in the console window. But before we round up with all of this, we'll also need to confirm that the length of the string that we're searching is at least up to 1. So I'm going to have an if statement that checks the length of the place name. So I'm going to say if placename.length is greater than 1, then we can now go ahead and perform our search. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this code inside of this code block, and then we'll be ready to go. So where are we going to make use of this method? We are going to call this method in the onTestChange callback of our destination test field. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to scroll to where we have our destination test field, which is here. So I'm going to go ahead and add the onChanged callback. So the onChanged callback will return value. Here I can now go ahead and call the method that we just created, and I'm going to pass the value inside of the method. Bam! So with this, we are ready to rock and roll. Now to confirm that everything works appropriately, we need to go ahead and test our app. So what we expect to see is that when we key in some search query inside of our destination test field, we expect to see some response in our console window. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so our app has fully loaded up. So I'm going to go ahead and click on search destination. So let's go ahead and provide some search inputs. So what we expect to see is the prediction results in our console window. So let's go ahead and do that. So as you can see, we are successfully getting our place prediction results, which is exactly what we have in mind. Now the next thing we need to do will be to go ahead and deserialize our results and be able to display the prediction inside of a list view. So that's exactly what we need to do in the next lesson. So as soon as you're ready, head over to the next lecture so we can get started.